What is up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of I'd Popcorn for That. I'm Chris,
I'm Nick.
and today we're going to talk about a movie called Bringing Out the Dead. It came out in 1999, and it was directed by Martin Scorsese and written by, well, the screenplay was written by Paul Schrader, and it's based on a novel by Joe Connolly of the same name. So neither of us have seen this before. It seems to be like one of the lesser talked about Martin Scorsese movies. But starring Nick Cage. I guess Nick Cage and Patricia Arquette, and then everyone else is sort of secondary roles. But it's good. It's a good cast. John
Yeah.
Goodman, um, Mark Anthony, who else? Tom Sizemore, Ving Rhames. So great cast. What did you think about this movie in general?
I thought it was pretty good. It was definitely a dark, depressing movie. Like, even the whole feel of the city, like, it takes place in New York City, so the whole feel of that, like, everywhere they went was just, like, dark and dingy, and l-
Manhattan specifically, right?
I believe so, yeah. It was just, like, real depressing. Like, even them going into the hospital and stuff, nobody seemed like they wanted to be there helping anybody. They're just like, fuck, I'm another day of this.
Yeah, there's not a lot of you don't feel a lot of empathy from that city, and I'm sure that's not far off from the truth, but it does seem like everyone's pretty jaded with this situation, and it's almost like I'm sure New York in 1999. I assume this is present day, or it says 90s. It says sometime in the
Yeah, I
early
think it says
90s or
early
something.
90s, yeah.
So it's like a few years before this was filmed, but New York in the 90s. I don't doubt that that was insane, but it is very like it feels very amped up to 11, like very post apocalyptic. Almost like just murder in the streets everywhere you look, but
Mm-hmm.
it is like amplified by the perspective of who we're seeing this movie through. So,
Yeah, through
but
the eyes of an EMT who's seeing all the worst of it.
and also neither of us have seen enough Martin Scorsese movies, so it's part of the reason we're making this channel. But eventually we'll have more to compare it to. But as much as I think we both liked this movie, we can both see why it's not like the first Martin Scorsese movie people think of, right?
Yeah, it's definitely different than all of this other stuff I've seen. It's I mean, he's mostly known for his big movies, of course, like Goodfellas and Casino and like The Departed, movies like that. But I mean, Shutter Island, I guess,
Wolf of
is
Wall Street,
Wolf of
yeah.
Wall Street. Shutter Island is more like in this vein where not necessarily a mystery, but just kind of like dark and moody almost.
Well, I think my take was like by the end of it, I felt like it was really good, and I think I left it liking it a lot, but I
Mm,
also thought it was a little inconsistent throughout. Like um I didn't feel like consistently engaged the whole way through the movie. Like there were some like when they go in, we'll talk about it more, but when they go into the like the drug den slash whatever, um things kind of slowed down. And I know I guess narratively I get why things slowed down with the pacing of the movie, and it makes sense for the story, but it slowed down to the point of like I'm kind of a little almost checked out in this moment for just a second. So there were some moments where it's like so fast paced and you can't help but like you're anxious with them and it's giving you this feeling of anxiety. And then there's also these moments where it slows down to the point of I don't know if you felt that way or not, but
a little bit,
you
because like there were certain things I noticed that they're EMTs, they're supposed to be rushing to get to these places, which they do. They drive, they get there, but whenever they're helping the people, it seems like they're taking their time with it. They're real lackadaisical. Like I think in one of the opening scenes, they're giving CPR and like they're just one, two, just barely
Mhm.
touching the guy, and I was like, they're not trying to help at all. But I mean, I don't know what that was about.
Well, and we can kind of work through the plot a little bit, but just as an overarching plot, the whole idea is Frank, what's his last name? Frank Pierce.
Hmm.
Frank Pierce is this um, completely burnout, at the end of his rope paramedic who is an insomniac and alcoholic. I mean, his partner jokes that he is on a diet of nothing but like whiskey and coffee and cigarettes, basically. Uh, so stressed out beyond belief, insomniac, alcoholic, depressed, and they make him look very convincingly like that. Like he's got the dark eye circles. Like he just looks like somebody who hasn't slept in a week and a half, and is sick of his job. And it's to the point where he's like doing everything wrong so that somebody will just fire him. But Manhattan is so desperate for paramedics that they won't. They're not. He can't even get anybody to fire him. Um, so he shows up late for work and people won't fire. I mean, nothing he does gets him fired. He basically quits and still is working there somehow. Like there's just no way out of this hell of being a New York paramedic.
Yeah.
And we see him like throughout this very tumultuous couple of nights. I don't think a whole lot of time really elapses over the
Yeah,
course
I
of this
think
whole
it
movie.
I it start it his second shift starts on Friday, so I'm thinking the movie starts on Thursday and it's just Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It's just 3 days.
Yeah, so it's not over the course of very long, but basically we follow him with multiple different partners because his first partner who is we'll talk a little bit more about each partner, but his first partner is John Goodman, and so we see him and John Goodman at the beginning, and they're called to a um, cardiac arrest, though I believe,
Yep.
or heart attack, and it's Patricia Arquette. Well, it's the character is what's his name? I think they just say Mr. Burke
Yeah, I think
is
so.
the man who's having this cardiac event, but his daughter's played by Patricia Arquette, Mary, and throughout this, and Nick Cage's character Frank being able to at least for the moment save her father, even though they thought he was going to die there. Uh, he tries to befriend Mary, and by the way, this is all underpinned by um, Frank is from the very beginning. He says like it's been a really long time since he's had a successful like actually saved anybody's life.
I
He
think it's
just
been
keeps
like
showing.
2 months since he's saved anybody, is what he
Yeah,
says.
he just keeps showing up in time to see people die, and it's just he's just there for his presence, and he can't fix anything. So he's basically, it felt like they were trying to portray him almost as like a junkie who is just addicted to this feeling that you get um, from saving somebody's life. I mean, there's like a little monologue, like voiceover, where he's talking about how you feel when you save somebody's life, and it's really poetically written and everything. But he's talking about, for a while there, I wish I had written it down, but it's like for a while there's rose petals coming out of your feet never touch the ground. There's rose petals coming out of your pockets, and everything you touch is, it's just, and it's like
Just like,
God has gone through you, and you were God for a minute, or God became you for a minute, or something like that.
mm-hmm.
So he's just like addicted to that, and he's going through withdrawals basically, and he's starting to lose his marbles, and everyone around him is noticing. But it's like Mary is that one anchor of like emotional normalcy, even though she's dealing with her father dying, and she's a former junkie and everything. And all this is going on while Manhattan is dealing with this crisis of, I'm sure it's like a heroin crisis. It's basically a heroin crisis, but there's this specific uh, heroin that's coming out called the Red Death, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Red Death, and it's just, I guess it's especially lethal or easy to overdose on, and so they're getting tons of overdoses, and
Yeah, I think they said it
everyone,
takes like 4 cans of Narcan to counteract it or something.
yeah, and it's like everyone, just to reiterate, everyone that works there, the general attitude is like, could you please die somewhere else? Like, could you stop bothering us and making us so busy? Everybody just is, there's no empathy for the fellow man at all. It reminds me of when we were talking about Beau is Afraid, really.
Honestly, yeah, it did
Because
remind me of a little bit of that.
it's like, it's not as extreme as that. It's a little more believable, but it is like, man, nobody cares about anybody at all. It's just get out of here, go die some other city or other state or something.
Yeah, like the trauma doctor that they see first, like the patients first see when they walk in, is just like, well, you fell down and hit your head. I didn't make you fall down and hit your head. Go treat it yourself.
Yeah, yeah, and that is just the general attitude, and so anyway, the overarching plot though, we go through all these different, um, him with all these different partners, and him in this kind of changing relationship with this character Mary, who almost doesn't. She seems like she's in some sense grateful to have somebody to talk to, but also she's just going through so much stuff right now. And at one point, it's obvious that she's about to relapse on drugs, and she's hiding it and saying that she's going to go see a sick friend or something, and she wants Frank around as either an comfort or an excuse. She makes it seem like it's to be protection in a dangerous part of town, but it's really like not really that, and she says she's gonna blame. She says she's gonna, this friend will talk my ear off if I don't have some reason to leave, and if I point to you and say you're waiting on me, that'll get me out of there.
Yeah, it was
But it's
almost
very
like
clear.
it seemed like an excuse for her to not use. Like she was gonna use, but then she was like, maybe I'll go up there and feel it out, and then if I haven't, by the time he comes to knock on the door, I'll leave.
And then so when eventually I guess he waits for 15 minutes or however long she says to elapse, and he barges through the door. And it's a very interesting scene in there where there's this drug dealer Coates who is this sort of like enigmatic, almost like pimp type character, or just drug lord, like old school drug
Yeah,
lord.
just very
and
smooth and suave.
and he calls it I guess the oasis, or he treats it like it's an oasis from the chaos that is the city and all this, and you can come here and calm down and relax. But really, what I mean, it's like an opium den basically.
Yeah, and
And
it is very different from the rest of the apartment complex because it's like super dingy graffiti everywhere, and then his is like very bright and nice.
it's like the only calm part of just about the only calm part of the movie. Like everything is so frantic and fast paced. It was almost like Heather was watching this with me and said it reminded her almost of some of the editing in Requiem for a Dream.
Yeah.
Just that fast paced, like jerky, And sometimes when they're driving the ambulances, like things speed up to ridiculous.
Oh
Like they're
yeah,
actually
yeah.
filming up
Like
the
the
speeding up.
it's like they're going light speed all of a sudden.
Yeah, and the sirens and the. But so he ends up in this drug den. Drug dealer sees that he hasn't slept in however long, is trying to just calm him down and assure him that Mary's all right and she's sleeping over there, she's sleeping sound, like nothing to worry about. And he in a moment of weakness or just desperation, Frank takes a pill from him, takes it and starts hallucinating about. Um, well, and we should talk. There's a ghost, you know.
Yeah, you keep seeing there's a homeless girl that was like 18 that he wasn't able to save, and he keeps seeing her face like on all these different
Rose.
people's. Yeah, her name is Rose, and all like pretty much every passerby he sees out of the window, like they'll turn and he sees her face, and she'll be like, "Why did you kill me?" And he's
Mm-hmm.
like, I didn't mean to. I tried to save you, and it kind of just happens throughout the movie like that, and becomes more and more. He sees her more and more.
Yeah, she starts to become. I mean, toward the end of the movie, it's like every face is her. It's
Hmm.
it's taken over everything, and he's obviously like lack of sleep, like. But so all that to say, when he takes this pill, his hallucination has a lot to do with Rose, but also he's like pulling people. He's like pulling ghosts out of the streets of Manhattan,
Yeah.
like directly out of the earth,
Which I took as to
and
be like people he couldn't save, and he's like pulling them back from the dead, which is, I guess,
bringing out the dead.
bringing out the dead. Yeah.
Um, and it's like everyone else just has such an easier time, it seems. I mean, in their own toxic ways. Like nobody's like healthy about it, but they have their own toxic ways of dealing with this, to where they just have a much easier time. He's like, you gotta let those people go, man. The people are gonna die.
Yeah. They
And he's
compartmentalize it a lot better than he has.
and as jaded as he is, I mean, it's like he's the last feeling. He's the only feeling boy in New York, you know.
Yeah.
And so uh, so toward the so he has this hallucination. He freaks out in a panic moment. He grabs Mary, takes her out of there, and then they sort of just well, they don't really say much, and they end up back at her place, and he falls asleep immediately on the couch, and she tries to wake him up for a few seconds, then no avail. He's out. This is the best sleep he's ever had in his life. And and uh and all throughout, well, I'm trying to think if I'm missing any like big things, but we're basically at a point where they've her father is in a state where they're just they're just around the clock trying to revive this guy from death. He's right on the edge of death all the time. His heart stops. They shock him back to life, and they do this over and over again throughout the day, and his life is misery. And there's a point where he's interacting with, not really interacting with, but he's in the room with Mr. Burke, and it's like he's being telepathically communicated to by him, saying that I don't, it's time to let me go. I don't want to live anymore. and the nurse is like encouraging him to, he's coding right now. We got to shock him back, and all this is happening while Burke is like telepathically telling Frank to please don't shock me, and cursing him out and everything. And so he's struggling to shock him back, and uh, there's a there's like one final call in the movie where there's a shooting, and it was at the drug den, and uh, the drug dealer Psychote's girlfriend, I guess, or something like
Yeah,
that, is dead, and he has jumped off. There was like a shooting there, and he's jumped off to not get shot. He's jumped off the building and impaled himself through the chest or stomach, torso, um, on like a spiked fence, a few, like a couple floors
like
down.
yeah, 2 stories down. I think he was on 16th floor and he fell from the 14th floor, or fell to the 14th floor.
So he's down there alive, but they're having to cut the fence and everything. And in this moment, he can't hold his head up anymore. Nick Cage holds his head, and they have this. There's this interesting conversation there where you realize that he's gonna ultimately end up saving the drug dealer's life, and this is the first life he saved in however many months of not saving anyone's life, and the drug dealer's very grateful and all this, and it's sort of like a redemption type situation, and then really close to the very end of the movie, he does end up he hooks the sensors, monitors, whatever to himself, and moves the cables one at a time over onto himself from Mr. Burke. Breathes through the breathing tube so that the sensors won't go off. Lets Mr. Burke die in peace, and then sets them all back up and feigns that he's trying to save his life again. And they finally pronounce him dead, and so he's let him go. And so the thought that I had periodically throughout the movie that I ultimately don't really think the movie was about, but it was an interesting thought I thought maybe worth mentioning, is that it felt to me like there was almost um, this idea that as much as Frank's character wants to be someone who saves people's lives, his real role is to let people pass on or move on to death and be like the angel of death, because the lighting in this movie is almost a character of itself, and there's like 1,000 different experiments they do with lighting, and there's all these moments where he's very overexposed and blurry and almost like angelically glowing or something, and it felt like they were trying to send this hint that like no, what his real calling is to be the angel of death, because then when he lets Mr. Burke go, it feels like that was almost more satisfying or more the right thing to do than the amount of satisfaction he got out of saving the drug dealer. Um, I don't think that was ultimately it, but anyway, just to wrap it up, at the very end, he meets back up with Mary. They reconnect, and he falls asleep on her chest in this way that looks like exactly like the statue of Mary and Christ, the Michelangelo statue of Mary and Christ. I'm sure on purpose. Um, and they're bathed in that like angelic light again, and then the movie is over. So there's other details that we can get into, but that's the general idea of the movie.
Hmm.
So what were some things that kind of like stood out to you through all that? Especially, I mean, I think we need to talk more about the individual like partners that he ended up
Yeah,
having
that's what I
through
was
the
gonna
movie.
say,
But
because it seems like each partner was very different in their own way. They all had very different personalities, but they were all. I feel like John Goodman's character was more on par with Nicolas Cage's character, where he's kind of over it as well, but he's compartmentalized it. He's not breaking down over it. He's just like, it's another day. I don't really want to do this, but I gotta
of
get out here.
the three partners, probably the most normal
Yeah,
ish.
yeah, because
Yeah.
there's even that scene where they're sitting in the car and like they just got some food, or the ambulance, they just got some food, and like they keep getting paged over the radio, and John Goodman's like, "Don't pick it up, don't pick it up," and they're just like yelling at him like, "You have to pick this up," for, like to their specific car,
Yeah.
and he's finally like, "By don't pick it up, I mean pick it up," and then they go on the call because they're like, "If you don't do it, we're gonna send someone to you."
Right.
But yeah, I feel like he was like a normal guy compared to the other two. Uh,
And then he calls in the next day, right? Like when Nick
yeah,
Cage is trying to get fired, he's like, Larry already called in.
Yeah, Nick Cage walks into the captain's office and was like, he's like, "Oh, you're late again for the ninth time. You called in sick 4 times." He's like, they're want the union, not the union, but whoever, they're wanting me to fire you. And he's like, I understand, you got to do what you got to do. And he's like, no, I'm not gonna fire you. We like
Yeah, yeah.
you gotta get out there. We gotta have bodies out there to help these people. You gotta help New York City. And then like reluctantly goes into the shift with Marcus, who's Ving Rhames' character. Uh, there was a weird little interaction there between him and the captain too that I thought was strange. Like the captain out of nowhere just like does two little
A
barks.
bark. Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's not even like a big mean bark. It's like a little like yippy dog bark, and it's
yeah.
very out of nowhere. And then Nick Cage is like says something about like
I
I
think,
could bark too, you know. And he's like, oh, I never said I could bark better than you. You're like, where
and the
did that all come from?
yeah, and the captain's like being super sympathetic towards him about it, and he's like, I swear, the next time I see you, I'll fire you. But it's like you can tell that's not gonna happen. They need these
Yeah,
people out there.
and you know, not to we should still talk about in the partners, but we didn't talk about Noel either, and
Oh
he's
yeah,
sort of an important role in
he's
there.
goes throughout the whole movie. Yeah.
That is sort of the thing. I think that's the thing that made me feel like I hadn't really, you know, said as the whole overarching story is the Noel storyline. But yeah, the Ving Rhames partner is a complete lunatic.
Yeah, he's like in love with the dispatcher who on their shift is the voice is Queen Latifah, and every
Yeah,
time he picks up the dispatch for her is like, this is, I can't remember what he says, like, this is Marcus or Zebra here for you and just for you. It's like his ambulance is like 6'3" Zebra or something. But
he's like this
yeah.
like ultra religious like womanizer, loves prostitutes, but he like all he talks about is Jesus
Yeah,
at the
he's like
same
a
time.
there's this like moment where they're saving a kid who's ODing, and he has like this Southern Baptist preacher moment where they all join hands and like Nick Cage is administering some Narcan to the kid, and then he's just going to this like praise Jesus and like this whole big thing, and I thought was pretty funny and like for his character
It's
was pretty
crazy.
spot
Yeah, it's
on.
very like yeah, very Southern Baptist like big tent revival.
Yeah.
Uh and I don't know. It's just a crazy it's kind of crazy to me that Nick Cage went along with it, but it seems like there's a lot of Nick Cage just being like, I guess I got to roll with some of the I can't beat him, join him kind of thing. Like I got to roll with some of these punches because he just acts along with all. He's like gives him the thumb up when he gives him the Narcan and everything.
Mhm.
But but yeah, so they all think it's a miracle. But that was the guy was overdosing on that Red Death. Um, which I mean, it almost doesn't play like ultimately. I don't really know how much of a role that Red Death storyline really played. I mean,
Yeah, not
it's
that much honestly.
it's just part of the reason that a lot of people are dying in the city. And but it seems like the Cy Coates guy, who is the most prominent drug dealer in the movie, is not dealing that. Like he's saying, like I got to get rid of these pesky kids that are, you know, just trying to make a quick buck. Like I've got regular customers that come back to me. I don't want them dying on me.
Yeah.
So I'm not really sure ultimately what the big reason for that Red Death storyline was, but it was there.
Well, and to back up a little bit, like Nicolas Cage does just get hit one after the other with these like terrible deaths that he's having to see. Like I think it's when he's with John Goodman that they get the shot call about the shooting, and it's Michael Kenneth Williams, who's Omar from The Wire, like laying on the
Yeah,
ground who's been shot, and he's like patching him up. They get him in the ambulance. It's like, all right, it's good. He's stable. They get him going, and then they get him to the hospital. He's dead. So that's one
and
who dies on him.
he's trying to like repent of his like I don't want to do this anymore. I want to get out. I want to make something of my life, and I'm supposed to
Hmm.
go in the military and whatever. And he's gone. And this just yeah, it just keeps it is rapid fire. Like everybody's and the thing with the
With Ving Rhames.
yeah where they're called to the I think they say it's like a cardiac arrest, and he's like, why
Hmm.
is everything got to be a cardiac arrest? But it's not. It's like um it's like a this
It's like a
I don't
crack
know if they're drug
house
I guess,
apartment.
yeah, I guess it's I mean, it's a crack house, so I guess they're crack addicts. But it's like this woman giving birth that doesn't. She seems to not know she's pregnant, or certainly her boyfriend doesn't know she's pregnant. He's thinking it's a miracle because they're virgins
Hmm.
according to him. But it's twins, and the twin that Ving Rhames delivers makes is perfectly healthy and makes it out, and the twin that Frank delivers does not make it. And so it's just another blow of like, even in the situation where there's two babies and one's going to live, the one that doesn't live is, of course, uh, Frank's. And so uh, there's that moment. You should talk about this, but that moment after they like Ving Rhames is celebrating, saving this baby's life, and Nick Cage is like beside himself for this baby dying, and
Well, he does try
and
to
that whole thing.
console him a little bit because he's like, you saved a baby boy. He's like, no, we saved a baby boy. It's like,
Hmm.
yeah, the one died, but you were still a part of helping keep this other one alive a little bit. And then, where does it go from there? Is it them back in
Well,
the?
they
They're
get
talking about it in
so
the ambulance.
yeah, so they're back in the ambulance, and he's like, you got to give me a drink, man. He's like, I know you're holding. And he's like, the bar's open, man, and they pull out some gin and orange juice, and like one or two sips in, uh, they're either so overworked that they're acting belligerently drunk, or they're really lightweight drunks at this hour of the evening, or something like that. But they're acting very, very drunk.
Yeah,
Uh,
I thought it was just they both worked. They're working overnights. It's 6 o'clock in the morning, and they're both like exhausted.
they're
It's probably a little
yeah,
bit. They're not eating
a
either,
loopy.
so no
Hmm.
food plus a little bit of alcohol. Yeah.
And so uh I think they get a call, and Ving Rhames like drives off excitedly in a hurry, go save another life, whatever, and like a taxi kind of cuts him off, and he swerves to. He's driving way too fast. He swerves to miss the taxi, and hits another car and just launches them into the air on top of, completely destroys the ambulance. And they're just immediately already laughing about it. Nick Cage climbs out and says, "I quit," and Ving Rhames is laughing about it and just telling him, you can quit, but the ghost won't quit. And it was a really unexpected. Like that scene took me by surprise
Me too.
in a lot of ways. I did not expect the ambulance to crash, and I thought the ambulance crashing was going to be the beginning of like the story completely taking a different turn. But it's like not only did it not take a different turn, and this is not me complaining about it, but it's just like in a lot of movies, a car accident like completely changes the trajectory of the movie.
Yeah, this
In
had
this movie, the ambulance flips over, they climb out. He says, "I quit." He didn't even quit. I mean, there's
he's back at work the next day.
yeah, I mean, I don't think Ving Rhames is done. Like, not there's no repercussions for that happening. He's at some point like the police chief is like, you'll have to fill out some paperwork about the crash ambulance or whatever. But it's good to see you again. And they just move on from that really quickly. But and then the Tom Sizemore partner is the craziest one because that is kind of like the penultimate moment of
Yeah,
the
that's
movie,
like the
I
final
guess.
act of the movie, basically.
Yeah.
Which,
So
yeah, because he was his original partner. Like when they first see him with John Goodman, which is a scene with Noel. So Noel is a character that you're introduced to when they take Mr. Burke to the hospital, and he's like laying on a gurney, strapped down, begging for water, and the doctor's like, "Don't give him any water, he'll die." Like, there's something
yeah,
wrong with him. They think he has some disease or something.
he has if he drinks too much water, he could die of something about his electrolytes or something. I don't know.
Yeah, so he gets out of the hospital. Somebody lets him out of the bed, and he sprints out in his gown, like running away. And on the first shift with John Goodman, they get a call to somebody that's gonna commit suicide and is bleeding out of the head, and like show up, and he's got blood all over his face. And he just is talking to them for a second. He's got like a broken bottle held up to his own neck, saying he's gonna kill himself. And then Nicolas Cage talking to him, kind of talking him down a little bit, and he's like, I can't do it myself. And then he like shakes his head, and blood goes all over Nicolas Cage.
Yeah,
And
he like shakes his dreads. Yeah.
yeah, and then he runs out into the middle of the street and lays down. Nicolas Cage runs over to him and he's like, "No, you misunderstood me. Like, we can't kill you on the streets. It's kind of frowned upon, but we have a room at the hospital where we can kill you." And he's like, "Really?
Yeah, you get to choose pills or lethal
Pill,
injection, whatever you want.
gas?" Yeah, he's like, "Pills. I'll take pills." So they get him into the back of the ambulance, and that's when Tom Sizemore's character first kind of shows up. And Nicolas Cage is like, "Oh man, that's my old partner." And John Goodman's like, "Oh yeah." And Nicolas Cage is like, "Yeah, he's crazy."
Yeah.
And
Well, and
then
and you see right then that they don't like they have a history. Tom Sizemore's character and Noel have this history that's
mhm.
not good. Like they already don't like he doesn't like him already, and he's this repeat offender or whatever.
Yeah,
But
he's
yeah,
basically like, "I'll kill you." And then Noel's like, "He's gonna take me to the hospital. They're gonna kill me." And he's like, "What? Okay." And
yeah,
then
and yeah. So at the end, they run into him, like Tom is the partner again, and they run into him again, and things get crazy.
yeah, they see him and like, I think Nicolas Cage like, "Don't pay him any mind. He's crazy." And like,
He can't help it.
yeah, and Noel's bashing the back windows out of cars, and Tom Sizemore's like, "He's not crazy. That's intentional."
Hmm.
And then he makes a little plan like, here's what
This
we're
really
gonna do.
stupid plan.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he's like, if he
you push
sees
him and I'll trip him, and then we'll grab him.
yeah. Because
It's like not a plan.
he's always running away, and Tom Sizemore's like, if he sees me, he's gonna run. But yeah, and he makes that stupid little plan, and like Nicolas Cage goes over and talks to him for a second, takes the bat from him, and Tom Sizemore runs up like a little middle schooler and gets on his hands and knees behind his legs for Nicolas Cage to push him over,
Yeah, yeah.
which he doesn't do. He bashes out the back of a window, and then Tom Sizemore's like, "What the fuck?" And of course, Noel just takes off down these stairs into this like, I don't know what that was. It was under a
I
building into an alleyway or
I'm
something.
trying to remember what, because Frank follows him,
Yeah,
like kind of slowly, and he finds himself down there. What was it he was looking at? Like something that kind of distracted him from the situation for a minute. Like,
I think he was just looking at. It was like just there were a couple homeless people down there sleeping, and like he was just looking at like this
mm,
one part, and I didn't even notice it at first, and the guy just like opens his eyes, and he's underneath like some trash bags and stuff.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think he's just kind of surveying like the state of the. Anyway, but ultimately, Tom is the character's name too, but Tom uh, and Noel end up down there and they're fighting and everything, and he's beating that guy like within an inch of his life with that bat, and they never say anything like.
He,
So Frank does save him from that situation, but he never like you don't see him like rat out Tom, or they never talk about what happened there. He just saves him from that, and it's very clear that he was about to die if nothing happened. And so that was like, I don't know, that was that the first life he saved, or I guess that's the second life he
I
saved
don't.
after the
I
drug
guess the
dealer.
second. I don't know if he makes it or if Noel died.
They say he was going to be all right. You don't see him again,
But
I don't think.
I
But
think I think that happens before they save the drug dealer, or was it after?
I can't remember. It doesn't really matter, I guess.
Yeah,
But
either way.
that is another life that he saves, and the other thing is like there is this relationship between Noel and Mary. So
Mhm.
like Mary grew up in this, I guess, a bad neighborhood, and knew Noel as this kid that was on the streets. And at some point, her father, Mr. Burke, had taken in Noel for like almost a year. So they're sort of close, and so she's always like encouraging people to see him as a human, and he just needs a sip of water or whatever. It was a little weird because it's like, well, it's not like Frank's character's not being not empathetic to not give him water. He just got told like multiple times that water could kill him, and then she's
Yeah.
like, he just needs a glass of water. I'm like, well, yeah.
Apparently
I
he
mean,
doesn't.
you're making it seem like nobody wants to give this guy water because they don't think he's human. But it's like, well, if people keep saying he's medically can't have any, I think there's other reasons here.
Mhm.
I don't know. And I don't think I've said this yet, but like for me, I hate to say it, I think of her as like a good actress, but the weakest part of this movie was Patricia Arquette, and all I can think, the only like excuse I can make, well, besides that I'm just wrong, and maybe she just killed it, and I'm just not, but but the only excuse I can make is like because this is such a good director, like maybe his thought process is she's so numb and like jaded by the situation that she's in that he does want her to kind of give like an understated performance where it's but it all felt like when I say one note, I mean like her voice was kind of like one note, like literally like one sound.
Yeah, I feel like maybe she is just kind of a monotone person though. Like other movies I'm thinking of her in, she's kind of like that too. She's just like real quiet and soft spoken.
Yeah, it just that was the only acting really in the movie where I was like, I'm not
Yeah.
getting a whole like I'm not getting as much as I because she's like crying through the whole movie, and she does look like she's been crying, but it just doesn't. All I could figure was the only intentional thing I could see is maybe just Scorsese's like I want you to just be numb to your situation entirely,
Yeah.
and maybe that's what she was going for. But what else are we? That's pretty much the movie. I
Yeah.
mean,
Besides
I did think there was a couple little things that I found out after the fact that I thought were interesting. Like I didn't know that Nick Cage and Patricia Arquette were married during the filming of this, and they got married. They got divorced like 2 years later, but they were married during the filming of this. And Tom Sizemore and Marc Anthony apparently like hated working with each other and hated each other in real life. So I guess it was pretty easy to play the role of hating each other in the movie. And I read that Martin Scorsese and Nick Cage did like ride-alongs with real New York City paramedics to kind of prepare for this and see what they had to deal with, and they like saw some gore and craziness on the way along. So, um, Oh, I didn't say this is this is just a weird fact about this movie, but it was this and Sleepy Hollow, directed by Tim Burton, were the last two movies released on Laserdisc. So if you're not familiar with those, it's like a I've never even seen the player for one. I don't know anybody that has one, but Laserdiscs. It looks like a CD the size of a vinyl record, and that was what your movie was on before DVDs. I mean, well, in between VHSs and DVDs, I don't know who. I don't think there was a lot of adopters to that format.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I know somebody who had, I think Sleepless in Seattle was on it,
Yeah,
but I don't know how many movies are actually made for Laserdisc.
and I will say too. So this is a coupling of a screenwriter and director who worked together a handful of times before. I might miss one, but I think so. Um, so the screenwriter was Paul Schrader, and he and Martin Scorsese worked together on Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, The Last Temptation of Christ, and Paul Schrader has his own career of I believe directing as well. I think he did like First Reformed, and but uh, but they were talking about how like he has this. I guess I should look it up, but he has this sort of habit, I guess, of writing. Let me see what it says here alienated men struggling through existential crises, which is a premise known as God's Lonely Man. And I think this is definitely an example of that. It
Yeah.
does feel like, you know, this is very much a movie about the existential crisis of one man and putting you in that headspace of. I mean, it almost makes you feel like an overworked, stressed out paramedic. Like it's a stressful movie to watch, sort of.
Yeah, it
You know,
definitely
you're on
definitely
the. I
was.
mean, not necessarily on the edge of your seat, but like it just it's pretty high octane and pretty tense the whole time in a way that not like an action movie would be, but in like a in your mind, like the stress of there's just
Mhm.
no calming all the even in scenes like it's really well done, like the extras and stuff, because scenes where they're just looking around the hospital, like you're supposed to be focusing on this one thing, but people are running around screaming about their daughter that they you can't take my daughter away from me, and all these different things are happening at once, and they do a good job of like making it seem like there really are 1,000 real stories happening here at once. Then and how is anybody supposed to make sense of this chaos?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, anything else you want to add to that besides our ratings and
No, I think that's pretty much it. I mean, there was one scene that really threw me off from the rest of the movie when Nicolas Cage and Patricia Arquette are sitting in that little waiting room eating pizza.
I know what you're gonna say. Go for it.
That okay,
Yes.
so there's a shot where it's like the side of her head, and then it's like a fade out shot where it's still the side of her head, another shot and it's to the other side of her head and it fades out, and then it's the front of her face, and then they're just back in a normal conversation. I don't know why they did that. It was
There
really
was no reason.
strange. I didn't like it. It was completely different from any shot in the rest of the movie, and it just seemed really out of place.
I mean, one of the first things I noticed about this movie was the lighting, the playing with lighting, and the camera being like a character almost in this movie. Like the camera is a third person interacting with these people, like
Mhm.
riding along with them or something. And
Yeah, like the shadows that like that and the light just right on Nicolas Cage's face, like to show the dark circles under his eyes, and like
yeah,
was really really good.
but they did a lot of like the camera work was so you can tell he was feeling like experimental in this moment, and Martin Scorsese has certainly he's been experimenting with camera work for a lot longer than I've been alive. But it's like in this moment, I don't know if it was influenced by Requiem for a Dream but there were some moments where the camera work and the editing and stuff got. Uh, Usually it was just experimental, and I'm either neutral or like thought it was cool. But yeah, that was certainly a standout moment where I was like, what on earth was anybody thinking with that weird, jarring, useless cut back and forth between them, different angles
And there
forever.
was yeah, there was no other like fade out of like because it was like her head was still there as it fades out into the next shot, and then no other shot in the movie was like that. I mean,
Yeah,
there was
it
the
was
shots where they're driving in the ambulance and like the lights are going all crazy over his face, but that's just that was good.
that was super strange. But I mean, for the most part, I liked all the lighting was really interesting because sometimes a lot of times like the street lights and the city lights had this like weird washed out, dreamy. It's almost like the camera got wet or like
Mhm.
foggy. Like the camera was like somebody fogged up the lens or something. But they did a lot with light in this that was interesting. So yeah, there's a lot here to like. Uh, I just didn't I didn't leave it feeling like that's a 10 out of 10 movie. It was just a really well done, really well written. The dialogue is amazing. You know, it's I'm sure they took a lot of this straight from the novel,
Hmm. And
but like the
especially,
dialogue is really well written.
yeah, especially comparing it to a lot of his other movies. I wouldn't say it's his greatest film, but I think it was a really pretty good movie.
I think I'd say underrated because I
Yeah.
mean, you know, it could certainly deserve to be talked about a little more than it is.
Hmm.
So what would you? How many how many kernels would you pop for this bad boy?
Probably pop like 6 out of 10. It's pretty solid, above average. Like, good movie.
You know, I think I just gave Evil Dead Rise a 6 out of 10. So I'm gonna give this a little more than that and say, yeah, I'll say I would pop 7 out of 10 kernels for this one.
Yeah,
So average between us is 6.5. That ain't bad.
that's pretty
That's
solid.
certainly a
Yeah,
recommendation. It is streaming. I don't think if we haven't said it on this one, it's streaming on Showtime. I think that's the only thing it's streaming on right now.
I believe so.
Um, but I'm sure you could rent it for a couple dollars. The next movie we're gonna watch is called
It is called
Hell,
Coherence. It's a
Coherence.
2013 film directed and written by James Ward Bierkett, who I haven't seen any of his other work. Apparently, he wrote Rango, the animated film with Johnny Depp. But it's yeah, it's supposed to be a surreal science fiction psychological thriller, and that's really all I know about it.
Yeah, we're going
I've
in
heard
mostly
it's
blind.
I've heard it's really good. We'll see. It should be
Yeah.
interesting.
So yeah, unless we get to see Blackberry before then, that is the next thing on the agenda. And if you guys liked what you saw and got anything out of this, uh, give us a like, share this with your friends, subscribe, please. We'll take anybody. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time.
All right, see ya.